Hi, in this series of Getting Onto the Property Ladder, we're going to be discussing how somebody who's not bought a property before, as a first-time buyer can get into the property game, how you can get onto the property ladder. So to make the decision about getting onto the property ladder of buying your first property, you've probably got a whole lot of questions, and rightly so. Where do I buy the property? How much should I pay? How much can I afford? What kind of property? Lots of questions. So in this series, we're going to cover them all one by one. And if I don't answer your questions, please ask in the comments below. Ask your questions. My objective here is to help you to buy your first home and to get onto the property ladder. And in this video series, I'm going to keep this ladder in the background to remind us what we're doing. It's all about getting onto the property ladder so that you can climb one rung at a time and eventually get into wealth, personal wealth. Because if you don't get onto the property ladder, as I said in my previous video, you stay a renter forever. And by the time you get to retirement age, you find you're still paying rent. And you look at the amount of rent you pay compared to how much you would have been paid had you bought your property when you were a youngster, you'll see, you'll say, I wish. And I really don't want us to live a life of regrets. Let's get onto the property ladder as soon as possible. In this series, my objective is to help you do that. Okay, so let's get stuck in. Today, I want to talk about the type of property. And there are myriad available. I'm going to kind of start at the more expensive and work down, just as a general rule. And with each type, I'm going to briefly list some of the benefits and some of the disadvantages, some of the pros, some of the cons. So let's start with your house. And I'm talking about a conventional house where you have full title to the property, and you have your neighbors and you have your street, and you might be in a boomed-off street or whatever. But I'm talking about a conventional house. The benefits of a private house is privacy. You can put up a wall as high as you want, as high as the local bylaws will allow. You can get on with whatever you get on with in your own house, in your own garden. It's nice to have your own house, not own garden, but we can't all afford that. And you might be able to afford it, but that'll be further out of town. And again, I'm going to cover this location of your property in a future video. But for now, let's assume that just the benefits of a house. So you get flexibility in your own house. You can build on a room, you can knock down a wall, you can knock down a door, you can convert your garage into a granny flat. There's so many options available to you, and your neighbors are far away. They're distant. They've got their own garden and the house on the other side, so they tend to be a little bit further away, and which means you don't have neighborhood noise to deal with. But the disadvantages of a house generally is, as a rule, you pay a bit more for a house than you will for a flat, for example. The disadvantages are maintenance. You are responsible for all the maintenance on the property, on the boundary wall. If your tree falls over the boundary wall and damages your neighbor's property, you're in for repairs there as well. But you've got to maintain your walls, your perimeter, your pavement too, to make it look nice. And then within your property, you're maintaining the roof, the gutters, the geysers, everything about the property you're going to maintain. And you'll be surprised if you're a homeowner, you just see there are always you have to budget an amount for maintenance, and there's maintenance all the time. And then there's gardening. You need to keep that garden looking good. When you buy the place, it's looking fantastic. It's been prepared for show day, and it requires effort, or you have to pay for a gardener. And then, of course, we have security. And in South Africa, security is a big issue. So you'd have to arrange your own security, be it electrified fencing or high enough walls, an electrified gate, or remote controlled gate. All those kind of options. You are responsible for all of those things. And like I said, houses tend to be a bit more expensive. Then the next type of property I want to look at is clusters. Now, a cluster is similar to a house, except it's in an environment where there's a homeowners association. It's normally very uniform. It normally has a security gate, so you have good security in the complex. And when you go into it, it's beautiful roads, normally well maintained and so on, but that all comes at a price. And that's one of the disadvantages of clusters. So let's say the advantages of clusters are very similar to a house. You have your privacy. Your neighbors are further away, but a little bit closer than a house normally. The stands tend to be smaller in a cluster. Um, it's normally a lovely environment, and you have good security. And you find with your neighbours, you tend to have a good community feel. So if community living is what you're about, clusters are great because you get to know your neighbours, and your children can play on the street. Like I did when I was a child, I used to play on the street. And in a cluster environment, you can do so again. The disadvantages of cluster living are, one, your neighbours are a little bit closer, and you are in a community, so you're going to need to deal with that. You have all the regular maintenance similar to a house. You've got your fencing, your garden, your roof, your gutters, your geysers, all that kind of thing. The costs are the issue with clusters. Apart from your normal rates, you have to pay normal rates anyway. But on top of that, you've got to pay a homeowner's levy. So you've got to pay for, the nice security gate that you came in with a friendly guy who waves at you every day, and the beautiful green lawns at the entrance and in all the common areas. You're paying for that. You're paying for it through your homeowner's levy. And apart from that, the cluster is very similar to a house. What I see generally is people who move into clusters are security conscious. So that's a really big plus. The next category I want to talk about is townhouses. Now, what I mean by a townhouse is sectional title normally, and they're normally identified by some kind of a gatehouse, common security entrance, and then your houses, your units they're either sort of ground first and second floor, or else they're all ground floor, and they are normally resort facilities, some kind of a communal braai area or communal pool or clubhouse, depending. So that's what I call a townhouse. And the one thing about the townhouses is developers are quite clever, so they tend to put up townhouses quite close to places of work. So one of the benefits of townhouses, they tend to be quite centrally located. They might be on the outskirts of where you want to be, but you normally find, you go to most townhouse developments, you'll see it's on the transport routes, it's close to the highway, it's fairly accessible to business and to work, and it's fairly dense in terms of population. So there will always be retail shops around, schools, creches, that sort of thing. So in terms of the benefits of townhouse living, firstly, security. A lot of people go into townhouses for security because security is very good, tends to be good. You have controlled access, and it's getting better and better. Nowadays they're using fingerprint access. Every person who lives there is on the system, his fingerprints on the system, his ID is there, so the people are known, all your guests are known, and it makes it for a far more secure environment. The resort facilities give you a certain lifestyle that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to afford. So you might think, I can't afford to entertain and so on. Have your friends around for a nice outdoor braai. In a townhouse, you very often can. You book the clubhouse, you book the braai facilities, you use them as often pools. So when you're looking for a property to buy, to live in, and this is a big thing for you, the resort facilities, make sure you speak to your agent, say to him, whatever you show me, make sure it's got a pool and maybe a tennis court and some braai area, something like that. And then of course the other benefit of a townhouse is you never have to do any gardening. The gardening's all included. So you pay a monthly levy to the body corporate, and the body corporate looks after all the exterior maintenance and all the garden maintenance. They'll look after the pool. You don't have to clean your own pool. It's lovely. You've got full access without doing it. But you pay for it, but it's in the levies. But because of the benefit of the number of people, for example, that security guard at the gate who smiled at you and kept you safe, his costs are divided by another 200 people. The things against townhouse living, and the first thing is really your levies, your cost of levies. You have a limited control about those costs. You have an AGM every year where you can vote and so on, but you're somewhat cornered by the body corporate you're in. The body corporate is the group of all the owners who form a committee, and that committee makes the decisions. So you're just a small part of the whole cog. So you have a voice, but in terms of vote, you have 100th or 150th, depending on the size of the complex. But generally, you all have the same sort of interest. You're all trying to have the place looking great and costing as little as possible with good security, not paying too much for security and so forth. Another disadvantage of townhouse living is you're very close to your neighbors. You have to be okay with communal living. You need to be able to deal with respecting your neighbors and dealing with neighbors who don't always respect you also. And you can't be as loud, and there's certain rules. You have to abide by the rules. So if you want to have a party and have the music loud until midnight, you're going to get into trouble with your body corporate. So it's not as flexible as a house and maybe a cluster. And then the next thing I want to talk about, lastly, I want to get to is flats. Now, what I mean by a flat is you often see them, they're normally older facilities, and they're normally in the suburbs, more established suburbs, and I'm talking about ground, first, fourth, up to 10th floor sometimes, but they often have retail on the ground floor. So on the ground floor, you've got some shops, and then you've got the flats above. So it's more of an old-fashioned way of doing things. Some of the benefits of these flats is they tend to be big. You get a lot of bang for your buck. The rooms are bigger, the ceilings are high. We'll be able to fit our ladder in there. And they're often cheaper. You'll be able to live in a good suburb at the lowest rate. So the cheapest accommodation in a great suburb will be some flats. The problem you have with flats is that you very, very often, in fact you always, have no control about what happens on the ground floor, your retail. And all you need is that the shops will be owned either by one person or different people, and you don't always know that when you're buying. And all you need is the owner of the facilities, the retail premises downstairs, to rent the property out to a bottle store, to a sex shop, heaven forbid. But this sort of thing, and that can really affect the whole caliber of the block of flats. So for that reason, I wouldn't buy a flat. Personally, I wouldn't buy a flat to live in. I never have, and for that reason I wouldn't do it. It's because of all the unknowns. And with flats, very often you'd have very little or no parking. So security is a bit of an issue. They were built in a time when South Africa, in the affluent suburbs, security wasn't such a big issue. But right now it is. So as a result, I wouldn't really aim at a flat. But they have their place. They have their place. They enable you to buy, to enable you to get onto the property ladder at the lowest possible rate, and from there you can move on. You can always afterwards keep it as an investment and rent it out or sell it and move on. As long as you're on the ladder, you'll be able to sell it at the next rate. So that's all I wanted to talk about today in terms of the options available to you as a first-time buyer. In the next video, I'm going to talk about location.